On June 23, 1972, Nixon met with the then CIA Director Richard Helms at the White House. During the conversation, which thankfully was tape recorded, Nixon suggested he knew, quote, who shot John, meaning President John F. Kennedy. Nixon further implied that the CIA was directly involved in Kennedy's assassination, which we now know it was. On June 19th, the Washington Post had published the first of many stories about a break-in at the Watergate office building. Unbeknownst to Nixon and unreported by the Washington Post, 4 of the 5 burglars worked for the CIA. Nixon got 17 million more votes than his opponent. Less than 2 years later, he was gone. He was forced to resign, and in his place, an obedient servant of the federal agencies called Gerald Ford took over the White House. How did that happen?
Who shot John? Eisenhower blame, Johnson to blame, Kennedy to blame, Nixon to blame, etc., etc., etc.
What's up, guys? It's your boy Benny. Who actually runs your government? Well, we the people, right? Isn't that what it says on the old document? Isn't that what King George saw that made him so angry and had him send all the redcoats over because we threw his tea into the harbor or something? Yeah. The reason why we threw tea into the harbor actually during the Revolutionary War was because we the people didn't run anything. King George's aristocracy, typically landed aristocracy born into privilege, unelected, that ran everything. The divine right to rule. And these people owned your life, controlled you. You had no rights, and they did anything they wanted to you. And it was often brutal, bloody, and awful. It was absolute and total tyranny. And so taxation without representation became the calling card for the American Revolution because we were paying taxes and we had absolutely no say in anything that was happening. Fast forward to today. Do you have any say in what's going on? In fact, does your vote even matter? That's a great question. And as detailed recently by Tucker Carlson in his People's History of the United States of America, it is becoming more and more clear that even our votes don't matter. Now, we're not trying to black pill anyone. America is always worth saving and worth fighting for, but it is important to actually understand the history of what's happened to all of us. Recently, Tucker Carlson went in hard against the permanent state in Washington, D.C. and their ability to remove presidents at will. Their ability to essentially remove some of the most important and popular people ever elected. In fact, Richard Nixon was the most popular president ever. I know it seems shocking today through the long lens of history and through all the psyops and all of the fake news, but Richard Nixon won re-election by 17 million votes. Richard Nixon was far and away the most popular president ever elected. He won, I think, 49 states. And so what happened to him? Well, Tucker Carlson detailed in absolute stunning, vivid relief how the permanent state in Washington, D.C. actually set Nixon up. How the people who raided the Watergate, famously, were agents of the CIA. And how the reporters who were being fed information by the FBI were actually also themselves not really reporters, and probably agents of the same federal establishment that wished to get rid of Richard Nixon. Why? Well, because he questioned who killed John F. Kennedy. Insane stuff. Tucker Carlson, take it away.
So if you want to understand, if you really want to understand how the American government actually works at the highest levels, and if you want to know why they don't teach history anymore, one thing you should know is that the most popular president in American history was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon. Yet somehow, without a single vote being cast by a single American voter, Richard Nixon was kicked out of office and replaced by the only unelected president in American history. So we went from the most popular president to a president nobody voted for. Wait a minute, you may ask. Why didn't I know that? Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't. In fact, if any president could claim to be the people's choice, it was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was reelected in 1972 by the largest margin of the popular vote ever recorded before or since. Nixon got 17 million more votes than his opponent. Less than 2 years later, he was gone. He was forced to resign, and in his place, an obedient servant of the federal agencies called Gerald Ford took over the White House. How did that happen? Well, it's a long story, but here are the highlights, and they tell you a lot. Richard Nixon believed that elements in the federal bureaucracy were working to undermine the American system of government, and had been doing that for a long time. He often said that. He was absolutely right. On June 23, 1972, Nixon met with the then CIA Director Richard Helms at the White House. During the conversation, which thankfully was tape recorded, Nixon suggested he knew, quote, who shot John, meaning President John F. Kennedy. Nixon further implied that the CIA was directly involved in Kennedy's assassination, which we now know it was. Helms' telling response? Total silence. But for Nixon, it didn't matter because it was already over. 4 days before, on June 19th, the Washington Post had published the first of many stories about a break-in at the Watergate office building. Unbeknownst to Nixon and unreported by the Washington Post, 4 of the 5 burglars worked for the CIA. The first of many dishonest Watergate stories was written by a 29-year-old Metro reporter called Bob Woodward. Who exactly was Bob Woodward? Well, he wasn't a journalist. Bob Woodward had no background whatsoever in the news business. Instead, Bob Woodward came directly from the classified areas of the federal government. Shortly before Watergate, Woodward was a naval officer at the Pentagon. He had a top-secret clearance. He worked regularly with the intel agencies. At times, Woodward was even detailed to the Nixon White House, where he interacted with Richard Nixon's top aides. Soon after leaving the Navy, for reasons that have never been clear, Woodward was hired by the most powerful news outlet in Washington and assigned the biggest story in the country. And just to make it crystal clear what was actually happening, Woodward's main source for his Watergate series was the deputy director of the FBI, Mark Felt. And Mark Felt ran, and we're not making this up, the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which was designed to secretly discredit political actors the federal agencies wanted to destroy, people like Richard Nixon. And at the same time, those same agencies were also working to take down Nixon's elected vice president, Spiro Agnew. In the fall of 1973, Agnew was indicted for tax evasion and forced to resign. His replacement was a colorless congressman from Grand Rapids called Gerald Ford. What was Ford's qualification for the job? Well, he had served on the Warren Commission, which absolved the CIA of responsibility for President Kennedy's murder. Nixon was strong-armed into accepting Gerald Ford by Democrats in Congress. Quote, "We gave Nixon no choice but Ford," Speaker of the House Carl Albert later boasted. 8 months later, Gerald Ford of the Warren Commission was the President of the United States. See how that works? So those are the facts, not speculation. All of that actually happened. None of it's secret. Most of it actually is on Wikipedia. But no mainstream news organization has ever told that story. It's so obvious, yet it's intentionally ignored. And as a result, permanent Washington remains in charge of our political system. Unelected lifers in the federal agencies make the biggest decisions in American government and crush anyone who tries to rein them in. And in the process, our democracy becomes a joke. Now, you may have noticed that the very first person in the Trump administration the agencies went after was General Michael Flynn. Why Flynn? Because Mike Flynn was a career Army intel officer who ran the Defense Intelligence Agency. In other words, Mike Flynn knew exactly how the system worked, and as a result, he was capable of fighting back. 4 days after Donald Trump's inauguration, the FBI lured Mike Flynn into a meeting without his lawyer, concocted a series of fake crimes, and forced him to resign. So that's how things actually work in Washington. Let's stop lying about it. Joe Biden, meanwhile, whooped like a hyena when the Justice Department destroyed Mike Flynn. So there is, we have to say, a certain perverse justice in watching something very similar happen to Joe Biden himself 6 years later. Joe Biden does not deserve our sympathy. He's being shafted, but don't weep for him. And yet the rest of us do deserve a better system, an actual democracy.
Ladies and gentlemen, if that stuff isn't bombshell enough, and by the way, all that stuff is everything. Every detail of that has been vetted, verified, and Tucker Carlson couldn't put it on air if that didn't happen. And it's Fox News, right? They have lawyers, they have massive corporate interests, trillion-dollar company. They can't put stuff on air that isn't verifiably true. What Tucker said there is true, and moreover, you can actually go back and listen to the actual recordings of Richard Nixon asking about the killing of JFK. It's wild. Richard Nixon recorded everything that was going on inside of the Oval Office. You could say that that was wise or not, but he did. And you can hear him talk about the truth about the CIA's involvement in the Kennedy assassination.
Who shot John? Is Eisenhower to blame? Is Johnson to blame? Is Kennedy to blame? Is Nixon to blame? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. May become, not by me, but may become a very, very vigorous issue. If it does, I need to know what is necessary to protect, frankly, the intelligence gathering and the Dirty Tricks Department, and I will protect it. Listen, I've done more than my share of lying to protect it. I will do it. I believe it's totally right to do it.
And so why was Richard Nixon so concerned about the CIA's involvement and his cover-up and his lying about the Kennedy assassination? Richard Nixon ran for president against John Kennedy in 1960. Richard Nixon and Kennedy were friends. They respected each other. Richard Nixon was a confidant of John Kennedy, and it was the closest election in American history up to that point. And so Richard Nixon, of course, would be concerned about who killed JFK. It's still a concern right now. The people who are covering that up is our federal government. If it were a court of law, the people withholding evidence, well, they'd be charged for obstruction of justice. The federal government, of course, controls so many documents and so much evidence in the Kennedy assassination, but we'll never see them. So exactly what happened during the Kennedy assassination? Tucker Carlson, looping back here, 1 month ago, asked a former CIA agent, high-ranking official, he doesn't name them, but said, did the CIA have a hand in Kennedy's assassination? The response he got was absolutely, unequivocally chilling.
We spoke to someone who had access to these still hidden CIA documents, a person who was deeply familiar with what they contain. We asked this person directly, did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy, an American president? And here's the reply we received verbatim. Quote, the answer is yes. I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake. It's hard to imagine a more jarring response than that. Again, this is not a, quote, conspiracy theorist that we spoke to. Not even close. This is someone with direct knowledge of the information that once again is being withheld from the American public. And the answer we received was unequivocal. Yes, the CIA was involved in the assassination of the president.
So what if everything you thought about your federal government was a lie? I mean, have you ever taken a, chance to really ponder that? What if the world that you believe you live in, the democracy and the republic you think you live in, actually isn't controlled by you at all? What if you're right back to King George level shackles, taxation without representation? What if there's a group of people who established a government above your government and outside of your democratic control? Well, that'd be very, very dark indeed. Let me know in the comment section if you found this video intriguing, helpful, informative. Let me know if you see something else that we should maybe be looking into, or at least bringing to light here. We have an audience. We want to serve you. We want to give you true information and just ask questions. The prerequisite to truth is skepticism and asking the right questions. And so we're going to keep doing that. It's very, very important. And it's actually the fundamental principle of the First Amendment, the right to ask. So who did kill Kennedy? Who got rid of Nixon? How was Watergate constructed? Well, maybe you've learned a little bit today. We'll keep fighting for the truth. We'll keep fighting for you. My name is Benny Johnson. A little special edition of The Benny Show. Thank you for watching. Our channel's here to meme the libs until they cry and then to meme them crying. Their tears, they taste just like sweet, delicious ice cream. Salty, too. We ridicule the establishment and the libs because of you. Your support keeps us going. So if you like what you saw, please punch the subscribe button, click like, and ring the little bell so that you know when we're live. Don't you want to know when we're live? And make sure that you subscribe to our email list just in case the plug gets pulled, as tends to happen. If you want to see more of our videos, click here or here. My name is Benny Johnson. Stay free, face patriots.